Hello and welcome, finally, to another episode of BioTalk. Once again, I'm Chelsea Zimmerman, and in this episode, Rebecca Taylor and I talk about scientists experimenting with three-parent embryos in an effort to combat mitochondrial disease. The Huffington Post listed it among their best sex moments of 2012, but this kind of genetic engineering raises some serious ethical questions. Let's get started.
All right, here we are again. Welcome back. This time we are going to talk about what scientists in Oregon did, or at least told us that they did, late October, which was create embryos with three parents, essentially. They call them three-parent embryos. And Rebecca, why don't you just kind of go through the science of what exactly they did in Oregon with these three-parent embryos?
Well, the idea is that they're trying to cure what is called mitochondrial disease. Now, if you remember back to your high school biology class, you have little organelles inside your cell that are called mitochondria, and they actually produce the energy used by the cell. And interestingly enough, mitochondria have their own DNA. It's a little circular piece of DNA, and you inherit your mitochondrial DNA straight from your mom and your mother only, because the sperm's mitochondria gets dumped at fertilization, and so all of your mitochondrial DNA you get from your mother. And so the idea is that some women carry, or some people carry, mutations in their mitochondrial DNA that cause disease. There's a bunch of mitochondrial diseases, and they're devastating. And so the idea was to try to create an embryo free of this mitochondrial disease. So what they did is they took a woman who had mitochondrial disease. They took her egg, and they extracted her eggs. And then they took the nucleus out of that, which has basically her nuclear DNA, and they put it into a donor egg, and that donor egg's nucleus has been removed. So basically you have an egg now with the nuclear DNA of the woman with mitochondrial disease, and the mitochondria of the woman who donated the egg. And so you have basically an egg with DNA from two women. Mm-hmm. And then they went ahead and fertilized that egg with the father's sperm. Okay, and so the embryos that resulted actually had the genetic material from three people, two women and one man. And then of course those embryos were destroyed, mm-hmm. Because the FDA has claimed, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States has claimed authority over this kind of practice, and of course they're not going to allow those embryos then to be transferred to the woman. And the idea is to cure mitochondrial disease, but really, this is absolutely not the way to go about doing this. Mm-hmm. First of all, you're creating life in a dish, right? Mm-hmm. No one, we all have dignity, mm-hmm. and deserve respect from the very moment we come into existence, right? At the end of fertilization. And being conceived in a dish is not, mm-hmm. Really respecting our inherent dignity. We really are meant to be conceived in, the loving embrace of our parents, and in our mother's body where it's warm and safe. And, so, being conceived in a dish is suboptimal, even if it is for a laudable goal. Really isn't respecting the inherent dignity of those mm-hmm. embryos. And then on top of that, you're actually modifying these. These are genetically modified human beings, mm-hmm. who've been experimented on, right. Without their consent.
Without their consent, right.
Without their consent. And on top of that, this is a germline modification, which mm-hmm. is different from, let's say, gene therapy we'd do for somebody with cystic fibrosis or some mm-hmm. other genetic disorder. In a somatic gene therapy, somatic is just a fancy term meaning a body cell, any cell other than mm-hmm. germ cells, right? Anything other than sperm or egg and their precursors. So a somatic modification is just in the cells that need it and in one person, and those modifications can't be passed on. Mm-hmm. So if we give someone with cystic fibrosis gene therapy for their lung tissue, they're not going to pass that on to their offspring. This is a totally different situation. This is a germline modification, which means that these children, if and when they're ever allowed to be born, cannot help but pass this modification on to their offspring, and then their offspring, and then their offspring. So this is, a huge thing. This is not something we should even consider doing, lightly, obviously. There's major safety problems, and it's not just for the one child. It's for every generation after.
Well, now, this isn't the first time this has been done, though, or something like this has been done, right? I think it was in, what year was it? Just a couple of years ago, 2010, in Europe, over in England somewhere. Some scientists created 3-parent embryos, but they did it in a slightly different way.
Yes.
In the UK, it was where they actually, I think, something like 2 embryos were involved for every one modified embryo that was created. Can you explain that a little bit?
So yeah, in England they're also doing the technique that was done in Oregon, which was kind of just modifying the egg and then allowing fertilization to happen regularly, in a dish, as regular as fertilization can be in a dish. In the other technique, it's a little bit like cloning, where you actually have 2 embryos. One of them has defective mitochondria, and so you take the nucleus out of that and put it into,
a new embryo.
A new embryo. So you've created 2, and you've cannibalized those 2 to create kind of a modified third, sort of, which is obviously way more unethical than the first. I mean, if we're going to grade this as unethical, that's really super unethical. The reason this has gotten press in the UK is because in the UK, like many other countries, unlike the United States, they have laws against this kind of germline modification. You can't do this in other countries. And so we're tentative here with our, FDA kind of claiming authority over this. But what we really need is, legislation like they have in the UK and, most other major, even China, I believe, has laws against germline modifications in human beings, especially in fertility.
So they have some standards in there in China.
Yeah, there's some standards. I think, don't quote me, but I really do believe that, even the Chinese have something. And so, we're really kind of in that brave new world where, anything goes here, especially in fertility treatments. And so, yeah, the UK, and they're still deciding whether or not they want to go forward with this.
That was kind of something that I remember reading a lot about a few months ago or whatever. It's basically they're asking the public to weigh in on should we do this or not, and should we go forward with this. I don't know where that's at this point, but
I think it's a moot point until the legislation's changed. I mean, they actually have laws against this. So as a country and as a legislature, the House of Lords and Parliament is going to have to decide to change the law of the land for this to keep going forward.
And that's where we, this is what kind of frustrates me when we talk about these issues, whether it's creating 3-parent embryos or, just cloning and embryonic stem cell research in general. People think we're so backwards in the United States, that we're so, that we have, because the debate's so hot here on these issues a lot of times, the thing is, none of this is illegal. None of this is, there are no laws against this research here, and by and large, there are no laws against, in terms of embryonic stem cell research, there are laws against funding.
There's laws against money, using federal taxpayer money.
Right, but not for this new research, though.
Yeah, there's no laws preventing.
Right, there's no laws preventing it, and I think I read that for this research, actually, there are no funding laws.
Yeah, and there's no funding laws here. There's we don't have any laws against cloning. We don't have any laws against genetic engineering. We don't have any laws even regulating the fertility industry.
Right.
We are the brave new United States.
Yes.
If the dystopian science fiction future happens, where there is a cloned underclass or whatever, that's going to happen here. Everyone thinks it's going to happen in China or somewhere else. No, this is going to be our legacy for the world. Is just the brave new world. I mean, read Huxley's book. It is, an amazing look into, I feel, actually much better than 1984. Look into this dystopian future where we've completely removed love and sex from procreation, and even a union of man and wife, and what kind of world that becomes and what we inherit from that. And the United States is going to be where that happens. It's because we just refuse to regulate the fertility industry, number one, and we refuse to even consider that there is an unacceptable way to create another human being. We really feel like we have children have become commodities to us, or things are accessories that we need to have, to fulfill our lives, and we will go to any length and for whatever reason we want to have them and to screen them or change them or do whatever. It's very disturbing, and so that's something that
it is, and this is where we get into, we have to start paying attention to this stuff as pro-lifers, especially, it's when, in terms of loss of human life, I mean, just these experiments are creating and destroying human life, especially once it's, the science starts progressing, they're going to be destroying way more human lives, than, we can't know the exact number.
For this to go forward, think about what has to happen. We are experimenting on humans, human children, just to see if we can fix this thing, instead of trying to mitigate their symptoms after they're born, or dealing with the gene therapy on a somatic level. We're just going to mess with them and see how they turn out. And we're not even, and we're so focused on giving those parents genetically related children, and we're willing to do that. And I think a lot of us are willing, to say, oh yeah, that's okay. Which is funny because we have a real aversion to genetically modified food. Right? So we're willing to we won't eat genetically modified food. Right? But we're willing to genetically modify the next generation, no problem. Right? Without any thought to their well-being or how that's going to affect them and future generations. It's a really odd contradiction that I have never understood. When Ben and Jerry's, made this fictitious company that was cloning cows, I think, and using cloned cow milk, or I can't remember what was going on. And I was thinking, these people probably have supported cloning research, the same have supported, embryonic stem cell research and cloning, where that is, creating genetically modified organisms, basically. And so we know what we're afraid to eat genetically modified food, but boy, we're sure itching to genetically modify ourselves and our offspring. It's really bizarre.
I can see them saying, yeah, but you're, with the genetically modifying, we're trying to benefit humanity through the genetically modified human beings. Okay, well,
Well, and the Catholic Church, let me be very clear. The Catholic Church is not against genetic engineering humans in every case. If it's a therapy reason, especially if it's somatic gene therapy, so you're taking somebody with cystic fibrosis and you are trying to correct that genetic problem in their lung tissue, right, with gene therapy, that is absolutely 100% permissible, totally laudable goal, okay? If you're trying to do like a germline therapy, just like this is a germline therapy that they're talking about. It's a genetic engineering for therapeutic reasons, done in a germline fashion. right now, ideally, we could support that, but the problem is that it's the process with which it is accomplished.
Right.
And right now, as Catholics, we just can't support that. And I don't know if we'll ever be able to support that. I don't know how you're going to genetically modify, future generations without there being some kind of ethical issue with informed consent and all this other stuff. They didn't ask to be genetically modified. So when you're talking about germline modifications, I don't really know if the Catholic Church will ever really back that. It's not a fundamental problem, with the idea of it. It's more, technical. Like, how are we going to do this without, marginalizing the inherent dignity of every person? We have to uphold that first. And, so somatic gene therapy, obviously, that's, very, very laudable goal, something that we really should support. With the germline stuff, at this point, we can't support that. Even if it's a laudable goal, we're trying to fix mitochondrial disease for every generation. We just can't do that because at this point, we don't have any idea what these kids are going to go through. In fact, there are a group of kids that were born in New Jersey or in the United States from a doctor in New Jersey about 11, 12 years ago, where he did a similar technique. And the FDA shut him down, and they're watching these kids very closely. And one of them actually has been diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder. So, the doctors were quick to dismiss the mitochondria as the problem, the mismatch between the mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA, and the fact that this kid had 3 genetic parents as the problem. Oh, no, that's not the problem. Well, how do we really know, and how are we going to track this over generations if there is a problem? So I don't even think it's something that we can touch.
Well, and that's the bottom line, though, is we really, as long as there are no laws against it, the scientists are going to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what concerns me, especially with with the cloning, with the scientists in California that, announced that they had cloned the first human embryos, the first, human cow embryos, human rat embryos, human rabbit embryos that they cloned over there. And the thing is, we actually don't find out about this stuff until they write papers and submit them into scientific journals.
Yes.
And so we don't know.
And then they show us a picture of a bovine embryo.
Right.
And then you're like, what is going on here?
And
why is this allowed to happen here?
And who knows how many other clinics or labs are doing that right now? They just haven't produced. They haven't actually written the papers to let us know what is going on.
Like, who's messing around with what? And we don't have laws against that here, and we really, really need to, especially since it's the women that are getting exploited for these raw materials. We're the ones.
Eggs. How are you going to create these modified embryos without all of these extra eggs that you need?
Yeah, exactly. Some young woman had to donate that. Some young woman had to, quote, donate, which is code for get paid to put her health, her life, and her fertility at risk, right? To make this happen. There's got to be a better way.
Which is why, one of the reasons why, actually, with things like human cloning and this kind of thing, why a lot of even liberal feminists are
absolutely
opposed to this kind of experimentation, this kind of research, because it is a woman's issue.
It's a woman's issue. Biotechnology, cutting edge, is a woman's issue. It always has been. It always will be. It's our uteruses that they have to use to, see if these kids turn out okay.
Right. And donating eggs is not like donating sperm.
No, men don't get that. I've never met a man who seems to get that.
Right.
And they're like, "What's the big deal?" It's like,
it's surgery.
It's surgery, and let's see how you would like it. I think honestly, if the tables were turned and you needed to do what you do to men to get out their gametes, what you have to do to us, I don't think cloning, any of it, I don't even think IVF would be a possibility.
Right.
Like, I really even think the whole fertility industry would be in major trouble, because men would just never subject themselves to that.
No.
Never.
it's not convenient. It's not pleasant. It's not, I mean, I've read where women, some women will, say, oh, it's not that bad. Women who do this and, want to justify it or want to believe that they're doing something good, they won't say there's any problem with it. But I've read where women are just, it's an awful thing to go through.
I've read absolute horror stories. And I've even had people tell me, that they knew somebody in college who's now infertile. And they're unable to have their own children. It's just not worth it.
Women, you don't have an endless supply of eggs.
No.
But that's what I think. I think a lot of women don't understand is that, yes, you're young right now, and you're, what you're doing, though, is you're not even just donating the eggs. Like, let's say, oh, well, I'm not using them right now. I'm young, and I'm not going to get pregnant for a while and whatever. But you're not just using, donating the eggs you're not using right now. You're hyperstimulating your body to produce more eggs than you would normally get rid of in a regular cycle.
Yeah, you're giving up your fertility for at least a year to 18 months, depending on how many eggs you get out. Right? What's really awful about biotechnology at this point is they're not being honest about how they're commodifying women. Right? And if we knew,
and that's why
the general public, how they're commodifying women, we wouldn't stand for it.
Right.
We wouldn't. Nobody would stand for it. And anytime that there's a ban on cloning, that's a vote for women. That's a protection in place from women being exploited for their. Well, this is where I think everyone needs to do. We need to stop and think. Voting for pro-life people into office isn't just about abortion.
Right.
Okay. It's about all this other stuff too. Okay. And if you're, what we need are protections in place for the unborn in laboratories too, not just in the womb, but in laboratories. To prevent this kind of thing. And it's the pro-life people that are going to vote for protections against germline engineering in embryos in the laboratory. They're going to, stop this kind of, massive creation and destruction of life, the exploitation of women for their eggs. This is not just about abortion. Pro-life issues, you have to vote pro-life, not just for abortion. This matters. All of this stuff matters, and it's going on right now, and we can bury our head in the sand and pretend like it's not happening. But we're going to be really shocked, just like when we were with Roe v. Wade.
These are things that we can do something about now. It's like with abortion, I mean, basically, there are restrictions we can try to put in place and things like that. But ultimately, that's going to come down to the Supreme Court at this point.
Yes.
These are things that we could, if we were serious about it, do something about now in terms of banning this kind of research.
Yeah, state legislation. It would be nice if we had federal legislation, because I really think life issues are a federal thing. But even on the state level, it'd be nice to know that I knew that my state research facility, my university, state schools, aren't doing this kind of stuff.
All right. Well, I think hopefully we're just going to keep pressing on this issue. I mean, and hopefully it will click with somebody. We can get a message to somebody who can kind of do something about this, because it's going to get worse, and the impact and the amount of lives that are going to be created, destroyed, manipulated. I mean, in the future could be astronomical if we don't. So, but thank you again for joining me, and we will do this again in a few weeks, maybe. All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.